I'm going to spend 30 seconds here and address an issue on one of my previous videos. Now, this is serious stuff, and I'm rarely ever going to do this. I'm usually always just going to jump right into the story. Yes, that was my dog snoring in the background. She is an older, fat little pit bull, and she is the sweetest thing in the world. But she's a fatty, and she snores sometimes, and I didn't know the mic was picking it up. I'm surprised only a couple of people heard it. I couldn't hear it over my speakers, but they heard it with their earbuds. So, okay, I'll probably never deviate from the story again, but I wanted to address that serious problem that I had with one of my videos. Today we have a story submitted by Gail from Alberta, Canada. The story is set in the Black Forest of Germany. I have several stories in the queue, and this one was fascinating to me, and I wanted to bump it up and get it posted by the weekend and share it with you all because I think it's really good. So here we go. It was over 30 years ago, but it still feels like it happened yesterday. My friend Sherry and I are from Alberta, Canada, and we're traveling Europe together for 6 months. We were both in our early 20s and were having the time of our lives. We landed in London and stayed for a couple of weeks before heading to Scotland to stay with relatives. Angus and Margaret were incredible tour guides, and we were introduced to every relative that I had in Scotland. I think we saw every loch in Scotland, and when we arrived at Loch Ness, Sherry and I were joking about seeing old Nessie. From Scotland, we traveled to Malaga, Spain by bus to stay for a month as we had a friend from home attending school there. We decided to travel to Germany where we would stay for a couple of weeks and then start traveling for a month on our Euro-Rail pass. We had an opportunity to pay for a portion of the gas and drive with a German man who had been vacationing in Malaga. He was exhausted, so Sherry and I did most of the driving through Spain and France. We arrived early in the morning to Baden, Germany. It's a southwestern German town in between the Black Forest and the River Rhine. We were dropped off at our hostel and thought we would enjoy the thermal baths that Baden-Baden was famous for. We decided to go for a walk and see what was available in this beautiful town. As we were walking back to the hostel, a yellow van pulled over and this older man got out and asked us if we were from Canada. Sherry was wearing a Montreal Canadiens t-shirt, so I think we were easy to spot. Phil introduced himself to us and explained he was a high school principal at the Canadian Army base. He was originally from Toronto. After talking for quite a while, he asked if we wanted to crash on his couch instead of at the hostel. Sherry and I were on a pretty strict budget and still had a lot of traveling to do, so we jumped at the opportunity. Sherry and I both have 2 daughters today, and if any one of them told us they did this, we would probably have a coronary. But back in the early 90s, I guess our mothers didn't tell us not to get in the van with strange men. After grabbing our backpacks and going to Phil's place, Sherry and I were in heaven. The Army base had a canteen with Canadian products, and yes, we were both craving a Dr. Pepper and Old Dutch chips. Not only was it familiar, but we also got to watch playoff hockey at 2 in the morning. Phil was amazing. We all had so much in common, enjoying sports, hiking, swimming, and drinking a beer or two. The following weekend, we decided to take a lunch and go to the Black Forest for a day trip. Sherry and I were blown away by the beauty, and there is a reason they call it the Black Forest. Phil was the perfect tour guide. After parking, we decided we needed to do a good hike in this majestical forest. We all set off with our backpacks filled with water and food. I remember joking that we had better not get lost in this forest or we would be in serious trouble. I think we had been hiking for about an hour with plenty of stops for pictures when Phil stopped short and asked us to be quiet. I wasn't sure what he thought he heard, but then Sherry and I also heard the thrashing through the woods coming towards us. I remember thinking maybe it was a bear, as that is one of the most terrifying thoughts when you live in Alberta, Canada. I remember smelling something that was one of the worst smells I have ever encountered. I think Phil got the first look at it because I saw his face go white and he screamed, "Run!" I didn't need to be told twice as I was petrified. Sherry was in the lead with me behind her and Phil bringing up the rear. As I ran, I remember just concentrating on Sherry's backpack as the noise behind us seemed to grow louder. My adrenaline was on overdrive and I think I tried to look behind me to make sure it was Phil and not whatever was making these noises. I not only heard the trees breaking, but it sounded like a loud rumble as well. As I turned my head, I felt myself going to the ground. Phil stumbled over me, and as we were both trying to get up, we saw it. It felt like it was making direct eye contact with us as it was still moving towards us. It was huge with hair everywhere. I think I was still thinking bear, but it was standing upright, and it did not look like a bear. It almost didn't seem as though this creature was moving very fast, but as we were running full tilt, it was keeping up with our pace. I remember the smell getting stronger, but my brain could not process what I was seeing. Phil was trying to help me get up, but I was so scared and confused my body was not responding. He finally yanked me up and screamed at me to start running. At this point, Sherry was long gone. As we started to run again, we heard the most terrifying howl coming from the beast. I do believe that sound made us run even faster. What seemed like hours later, I saw something coming toward us and I was finally able to process that it was Sherry. She screamed at us to get down. Phil grabbed me and hauled me to the ground as I was not able to comprehend what Sherry wanted from us. I just wanted to keep running to safety. Phil put himself on top of me to protect me from we did not know what. As I looked back and saw the creature break out of the trees and continue to come at us, I thought that going to the ground was the worst idea ever. I heard an explosion, and then I looked up. I could see orange and red and smoke. The beast was startled and stopped. That is when I heard another explosion, and the creature turned and started running in the opposite direction. Phil got up and pulled me up, and we started to run towards Sherry. It was then that I noticed Sherry was holding a gun. We all started running towards the van. Once we were all in and Phil started to drive, I finally broke down and started to cry. I think we drove about 15 or 20 minutes before Phil pulled over, and I saw that he was shaking and he was sweating very bad. He reached over to Sherry and took the gun from her hands, and that's when I realized that it was a flare gun from Phil's safety pack. I was in shock and just kept asking them, "What was that?" Phil started to drive again, and besides me crying, there was no sound in the vehicle. When we arrived back to Phil's place, we all hugged and sat down to talk about what had just happened to us. We all were trying to make sense of what we saw, but regardless of what logical reason any of us brought up, we knew that it wasn't the truth. It was Sherry who first said the word Sasquatch. I tried to deny that's what it was, but Phil was just shaking his head and finally said that he had no other logical explanation of what we had seen. Sherry then asked if we were going to say anything and who we might tell. After a lot of discussion amongst the three of us, Phil finally talked us out of saying anything. Sherry and I were about to leave and probably not see him again, and he would be the one taking the flak alone as he was a professional. I think he pictured his high school students hearing this story and him never living it down. After a lot of discussion, Sherry and I agreed to just continue on with our travels and to try to forget this experience. Sherry and I left on the Wednesday and started our Eurail pass for the month. Sherry and I talked about what happened during the rest of our trip, but we did not share this experience with anyone. When you meet people traveling, you might stay together for a day or a week, but you don't stay together for long, and I don't think either of us needed anyone thinking we were crazy. When we arrived back in Alberta, I had to go to California the following week. I was going to be a nanny because my funds were non-existent. In those days, it was a lot harder to stay in touch without the internet, and Sherry and I both went our separate ways. My husband and I moved back to my hometown 12 years ago, and Sherry and I have now reconnected. We did admit the only ones we have told this story to is our husbands. My husband is the one who found this YouTube channel, as he has always believed the story that I shared with him. After he saw Sherry and I together discussing our experience, he had no doubt in our story. Sherry is now a widow and has agreed with me to share our story with you. I think a part of why we want to share this story is we hope Phil will hear this, as I am sure he is as obsessed as Sherry and I are. Phil, if you ever hear this story, please reach out to Dixie Cryptid, as he has our contact information, and both Sherry and Gail would love to speak to you.